On January 11th, 2012, a company called WTF Events with a Z was incorporated in Kanpur, India. On January 27th, the company rolled out a slick new website and accompanying socials promoting the Indian Gaming Carnival 2012, scheduled from April 6th to 8th of that year. And the promises they made for this event were pretty crazy. $300,000 prize pool. 300,000 people would be attending. A spacious luxury venue. Major international esports teams. Giveaways of gaming PCs, iPads, consoles, phones. Cosplay. Exhibit spaces for major brands. Celebrity visits. Swag. After parties. Your crush. In the mood. Champagne foam, millennial whooping, product launches, Rolexes, you become more attractive, gamer fuel on tap, Red Bull, and IV drips, and much more. Okay, so a few of those I might have made up, but even with what they were promising, it wasn't just going to be the biggest gaming event in India. Nothing like this in esports had ever been pulled off before. Anywhere. And when people saw this, they said, wow, this is a scam. Oh! And it was. I mean, people fell for it, but it definitely was. And you would think a scam spotted so early would fold and be forgotten. But it didn't. Instead, it grew to the point where it lost people tens of thousands of dollars, resulted in a confirmed assault, robbery, and hospitalization in a separate robbery of a major esports team, spawned one of the most bizarre and disastrously run events in gaming history, and cratered an entire country's fledgling esports scene. What follows is the story of IGC. From the moment it was announced, people, especially Indian gamers, became very suspicious about this event and its promises. The first problem was the prize pool, which seemed way too big. These are literally the very first comments on the forum Indian Video Gamer in response to the IGC launch. Prize pool of 300,000 USD? Find that hard to believe considering international tourneys like MLG/Evo don't pay out so much for their games. Partners, Yuvraj Singh Foundation and Zomato.com, just two, and that prize money? I find it hard to believe. Now, to some of you Zoomers, 300K might not sound like that much money for a tournament these days. I mean, that one kid won 10 times that playing Fortnite. Fucking Fortnite. But context here is important because we're talking about 2012 and we're talking about India, a place and time you might call an esports desert. Video gaming professionally just wasn't a thing. Traditional sports, huge. But this shit?
That's dumb. That is a dumb, stupid, dumb idea. No. Dumb.
It seems, at least back then, that gaming was looked down upon in the wider culture as a waste of time, certainly not a profession, but also esports struggled due to piracy. A big problem in India for a lot of media, which meant that big games companies did not view it as a worthwhile market for advertising. So, attracting serious sponsors to fund esports events was next to impossible. I want you to picture esports in India, so close your eyes.
I'm so out. I'm so out.
And for those unaware, it's the sponsors and games companies that pay for these tournaments. These harsh realities not only meant that 300K sum sounded very unrealistic, they also meant that esports in India was basically all grassroots and tight-knit. The scene wasn't very big, so everyone kind of knew everyone. So these eye-popping promises from a brand new, unknown company were really, really far-fetched for anyone who knew better. Fortunately for WTF, not everyone did.
The Rose Bowl is packed. Not an empty seat anywhere. And we are
crowds, especially big crowds, are hard to put together. It takes a lot of time and planning. People don't like showing up for shit. So the 300K turnout claim for IGC was the other thing that was called out right away as super suspicious. I mean, it wasn't even really suspicious. It was just dumb. 300,000 people are coming to your video game tournament, stupid? What are you, the Pope? The largest crowd for an esports event as of 2022 has been roughly 40,000 for the 2014 League World Championship. The largest crowd for a Super Bowl has been a little over 100K in 1980. So, to promise 3 times that for a first-time gaming tournament in a country that didn't care much for gaming was beyond absurd. And to beat this dead horse a few more times, the venue, a Yachty Convention Center, a large but kind of poorly located space in the suburbs of Delhi, could accommodate 20,000 people. But they were promising 100,000 guests a day. So 80,000 over capacity, meaning 80,000 people waiting in the heat outside. TanaCon on steroids, a fucking humanitarian disaster. And I'm pretty sure the 2-lane single entrance road with no parking lot leading to the venue wasn't going to accommodate that kind of crowd. So, what can we know from all this? Well, at the very least, the fact that the WTF events people were consciously lying, not just exaggerating, not overpromising, but advertising features they would have known were impossible, and doing so very unconvincingly. And gamers and the public were not the only targets of this deceit. As I think will become clear, it's more than likely the organizers were lying to sponsors, each other, and maybe even to themselves. But firstly, who were these people and how did they come to create IGC? Well, actually, a decent number of people were involved in IGC at some time in some capacity, which kind of makes you think that they would have done a better job. But the core team was small, and we'll focus on 3, and of those, principally 2. First, there was Mukesh Maxax Murya. This fellow was the lone known quantity in India's gaming community. See, he was a genuine old-school nerd and a longtime moderator of the Erodov forums, a big influence in India's gaming community. He was brought on by the WTF people, it seems, to act as a public liaison to the gamers. As such, he became the very punchable public face of WTF. No foreshadowing there. Second was Kushagra, or Conquistador Kushagra, according to his LinkedIn. Super professional, by the way. This guy was the frontman, lead promoter, and the showrunner. He was Mr. IGC, and seems to put the scheme in motion with the backing of the company he worked for, Gen Next Promoters, a Delhi-based real estate and construction company. But ultimately, it seems like he was taking a gamble on the event with other people's money. Which leads us to our third guy, Upendra Singh Rana. I don't know. Kushagra's boss and owner of Gen Next Promoters, who seems to have put up the money for the tournament. And by that I mean the money to promote the tournament, not like actually, do it. I can't find out too much about this dude, other than that he misattributes quotes to Gandhi on Facebook, but it seems he remained largely behind the scenes. And despite his ownership stake, given this guy's age and lack of on-the-ground involvement in IGC, you get the feeling he was pitched on this scheme by some of the younger people who work for him, and then ended up throwing more and more money at a bad bet. All right, we know who was behind IGC, we know why people were immediately suspicious, but a whole bunch of drama and lying took place between IGC's announcement in late January 2012 and its commencement in April. Now, if I tried to explain all that stuff, it'd be a mess, so I won't, but I'll try to list the major events in the lead up to opening day. The Double Down PR strategy. Here's an actual tough question. What do you do when you announce an incredibly ambitious public event and you're met with utter disbelief and ridicule from the target audience? Well, the WTF folks responded by doubling down on every promise repeatedly. For instance, on February 21st, in order to ward off the early suspicion, Kushagra and Co. held a press conference at the 5-star Le Méridien Hotel in downtown Delhi, basically repeating their crazy promises and assuring everyone they were really serious. In this and other instances, it's clear that part of WTF's strategy was using promotion as the primary evidence that the event was going to be as promised. Basically saying, look, we rented a nice hotel conference room. We have a nice website. I'm wearing a suit. Therefore, it's all legit. Of course, given the event was not going to be as promised, this PR strategy was pretty much digging a bigger and bigger hole for themselves. And by March, there was a full-on pile-on building of gamers, especially Indian gamers, creating forum threads, Facebook pages, blog posts, and articles about how IGC had to be a scam. At first, WTF responded with the classic Barbara Streisand effect, banning any questions on the IGC Facebook page and eventually locking it, and responding to doubters with, "It would be pleasure for us to have you in our office for lunchtime. I'm sure that will authenticity prove itself."
But it spun from nowhere.
You ask any smun. Weirdly, this didn't inspire confidence. So again, WTF stepped up their efforts to win people over by spending money, not on the event itself, but on more promotion. They apparently bought a bunch of billboards around Delhi and posted ads in major metro newspapers. They also partnered with Game Orbit, an esports organization, to create these genius promotional videos full of terrible camera angles and copyrighted music.
You can't do that.
Honestly, this might be the best thing to come out of IGC. They're truly gems, these videos. Check them out. And they wrangled some local media into releasing a few very uncritical hype articles and interviews days before the event itself, asking questions like, "How has the response been so far? What are your expectations? We are expecting 100,000 visitors at the venue per day. That's huge."
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say.
I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor for financing the parts for this Frankenstein monster.
Sponsor begging. This is actually one of the most important facts of our story. IGC would run unsponsored, but it wasn't for lack of trying on the part of WTF. Gamers caught IGC's official account spamming EA's Facebook posts back in February 2012, pleading for a sponsorship. Not exactly a boardroom negotiation. And the partner IGC did have, Zomato.com, was just doing ticket sales, not putting up any money. WTF also claimed at one point that other random Delhi construction companies would sponsor the tourney, which makes a lot of sense, because you ever notice how sponsors for esports events generally sell things that gamers, teenage gamers, would buy, like games, energy drinks, and industrial drywall? You know, teenage gamers always on the lookout for a new cement contractor. They also listed Red Bull as a partner at one point, but that seems to have fell apart or was a lie. I don't even know. Eventually, they just admitted they had no sponsors and were putting up all that prize money themselves. Because that's a true thing, of course, because that's how the truth would sound, because it's true. Okay, there are a few more important events before opening day, but we're gonna speed run them. Big teams attend / bank guarantee. So you might be wondering, if everyone seems to have spotted this scam, who ended up believing it? Well, not too many Indian gamers, it seems, but weirdly the people who certainly were convinced were a number of major foreign esports teams, including Moscow 5, a top Russian Counter-Strike team, who announced on March 29th that they would attend IGC. Apparently this was a result of, in part, a bank guarantee WTF said they took out on the prize money in early March. Basically, they convinced foreign teams that they had documentation from Indian banks, essentially ensuring the prize pool. They did not, as promised, share these documents with the public, but apparently it was shown to the teams in private. Eventually, it leaked though, and more on that later. the buyout that wasn't. This is kind of a minor event, but I'm including it because it's weird and funny. On March 16th, the VP of marketing of WTF Events emailed Copenhagen Games, a smallish Danish game dev and tournament host, offering to buy their company for $100,000. This was especially odd because Copenhagen Games is based in Copenhagen, Denmark, across the globe. The only thing it had in common with WTF Events was they were both running a gaming tournament on the same weekend. So they told WTF Events, why are we getting a buyout offer from the VP of marketing? Also, $100,000 isn't nearly enough. Also, it's probably not legal for you to buy us. And it's also not for sale. I mean, get it together, man. And finally, the Irodov drama. Irodov, as I said, was a forum at the beating heart of India's gaming community, and for that reason, WTF really wanted Irodov to support IGC. I mean, they hired one of its mods to promote the tournament. But on March 22nd, only about 2 weeks out from opening day, the influential lead mod of Irodov, Vijay Nainal, posted a thread basically throwing his weight behind the view that this was a total scam and broke down why it was bullshit. The thread blew up. Then Irodov moderator and WTF Events employee Max Axe jumped into the thread to say, basically, I throw my reputation as a longtime mod behind IGC, so trust me. Also, we'll sue you if you say bad things about us. Apparently, he and Kushagra then called the owner of the Irodov board and threatened him with lawsuits if they didn't remove the thread. But you see, that totally backfired. The next day, Max Axe had his mod status revoked, and Kushagra spent some time making increasingly shrill, panicky, and long-winded posts on Irodov complaining about the negative attention. This is where he admitted that every sponsor refused to have anything to do with them. The lead mod Nainal and others on Irodov tried to warn foreign teams not to attend, and later helped promote an article written by a local gaming journal, the Games Ministry, that showed the venue had zero signs of any preparation just 3 days before the tournament. The Indian gaming community was blowing the whistle as hard as it could. Getting nervous yet, stupid? You glad you did this? With just days left, while a lot remained in doubt, it seemed certain by that point that if the event ran at all, it would not go smoothly. But somehow, weirdly, it also had to run. I mean, it seemed like the organizers were doing everything to get people to come. So the stage was set. There were no sponsors, but teams were flying out. The forums were salivating, and the WTFers were still promising. It all looked like an impending disaster. So, firstly, I want to say I've spent a lot of time trying to reconstruct this event. And I think the earliest captures of IGC on the morning of day one come from Game Orbit, that org responsible for the terrible promo videos. And I'm looking at this, looks all right. Working hard, putting up signs. They started before dawn. I think this looks pretty decent. You can tell time's going by. I mean, look at that sun. It's late in the morning. I think this is okay. And then they take a look inside the venue and it's like, oh no. Oh my fucking God. Nothing's ready. And here the album just ends. Like the photographer realized at that moment they should not capture the rest of this shit show. And they were right, because it got much, much worse. All the same, this album paints a perfect little metaphor for this entire debacle. The only thing ready on the morning of IGC were the signs promoting the event. The event itself, an empty room. But what was it like from the perspective of the gamers? Well, attendees started showing up around 10 a.m., the official start time, but they were told to wait outside the Ayati gate because there were just a few tiny little things here and there that needed to be finished. So people waited and kept waiting. Hey, it's getting really hot out and we're thirsty. Can we come in now? Absolutely fucking not, but also we'll be ready soon, so don't worry. Foreign teams showed up too, and here's Moscow 5's reaction. And soon, as though the Indian Gaming Carnival were a war zone or a natural disaster, finding drinkable water became a major issue for everyone there. For 3 hours. They waited 3 hours outside in the midday heat. The foreign teams, having not prepared for this predicament, were reduced to begging the Indian gamers for something, anything, to drink. It was so hot and the wait so long that some people developed symptoms of dehydration and heat sickness and had to leave. And IGC hadn't even started yet. Finally, at 1 p.m., the gamers were let in. And it seemed WTF had managed to get everything ready inside the venue just in the nick of time. Yeah, psych, it was a goddamn mess. Nothing was ready. As soon as folks walked in, many noticed that it had not a great setup. You ever go to like a highway rest stop and there are those sad little picnic tables that teenagers have graffitied all to shit and carved up, and there are weird stains where someone's, I don't know, stabbed or something? Well, IGC rented like 200 of those. And in fact, as far as the video game setup went, there was no setup. No PCs or consoles were ready. Oh yeah, and they were still missing, in a so sad it's funny twist, electricity, which is actually necessary for video games, not to mention modern life.
Well, that's fucking not good.
So I guess even if they did have things set up in time, it still wouldn't have mattered, because without power, food, or water, the only game anyone would be playing was Refugee Camp Simulator. Unsurprisingly, upon seeing this lack of preparation, many realized they'd been conned and immediately demanded refunds. Around this point, the disaster made its way online, where the forums were eagerly awaiting news. As soon as it became clear this was a total disaster, the owner of the Irodov board contacted Zomato.com and explained that people were being sold tickets to an event that was, in essence, not running. The Zomato folks, being a real company, not trying to abet a scam, were alarmed and said within minutes they would grant refunds to anyone who wanted them, which included pretty much everyone at the event. Simultaneously, in scumbag fashion, WTF organizers were trying to get people at the event to buy tickets in cash from them, where they'd control the refunds. One of the things you might have noticed in some of these opening day pictures is that there's a stage being set up with what looks like lighting and speakers outside the venue. This was actually meant to be the stage for the celebrity guest, Honey Singh, a fairly famous hip-hop act in India. And this was legit. He actually announced in a video that week he would be performing at IGC at the end of the first day. But having heard about this mess, he quickly canceled. Sorry guys who've been setting up this stage in the hot sun all morning and who were likely promised payment after the event, Honey can't make it. So with partners pulling out, people demanding refunds, and nothing being ready, the organizers did their best to stall for time. Hey, remember the cosplay competition? That's something we can do without any preparation or, electricity. So the organizers apparently conscripted various girls in attendance to just wear random costumes of characters many had never heard of before. WTF then marched out this confused, unhappy lineup of unwilling cos slaves to stand there uncomfortably in front of a mob of seething gamers who were not going to be mollified by Indian Chun-Li. I mean, these pictures speak for themselves. Someone is not happy. What happened the remainder of the day? Well, not much. A lot of sitting around, a lot of yelling. People seemed to eventually migrated outside where they gave some very dispirited interviews. The foreign team seemed to be disappointed but kind of resigned.
Okay, I'm Jenny, MITH manager. We came from Thailand, 21 person for ITC. Actually, they asked us to come at 10 a.m. and we preparing everything and come. But until now, like 6 p.m. already, everything still like haven't finished, haven't done.
In contrast, the parents, younger kids, and casual gamers who'd just come for fun were well aware they were not getting any of that. And they were pretty mad.
So you're ready to wait for another hour?
Yeah, and that's like the limit. If that doesn't happen, we're going to blow up. We are okay with waiting 1 hour. More than that, we can't wait.
But what did you expect out of this event? You know, when you read it in the newspaper?
To be honest, we expected much better.
Okay, but you think it's just...
If this is something like a benchmark, obviously no other country gamers would turn up to India, and at least for a promotional basis they wouldn't turn up. I have been seeing since 8 years all the tournaments I have attended. I've seen very good, very decent tournaments at least, but this is the worst as of now.
अरे सर मेरी किस्मत बड़ी है सर मैं 10 चुंगम लेकर आया
बस ठीक है सर मैं आपके पास आ रहा हूँ 50,000 भी इस पे आप जुर्माना हो जाएगा तो भी आप पूरा नहीं कर पाओगे पता आपको ये बात और मेरे जैसे पता नहीं 5-5 लाख वाले भी खड़े हुए यहाँ पर मेरे पास आगे क्या करो मैं आपके पास आगे यार आप इनको छोड़ो इनका क्या जरूरी है पहले हमारा जरूरी करो ना यार हर एक आदमी वैल्यू एक ही होगी याद ना लगे.
Each video, even from the IGC-friendly outlets, is a scene of rage or disappointment or both. No one was happy.
I'm being honest. Let me be honest.
But they never let him be honest. He just kept lying. Kushagra & Co. really did throw Max X to the wolves on this one. Hey man, we all have jobs. We lied to them and stole their money. Now you gotta go out there and justify it. At 6 p.m., after many had already left, IGC announced that day one, with not a single game played or PC turned on, was over. But not to worry. Come back tomorrow, they said, when everything would go great.
What are your thoughts about what has happened today?
Actually, we're rather disappointed. We're a little bit disappointed.
Compared to day one's implosion, day two went better, in the sense that there was, technically, a gaming tournament. But by any other metric, it went very, very badly. Amongst other things, the crowd had thinned quite significantly. As one blog observed, basically all the casual gamers, kids, parents, people curious about esports had left. Anyone here was a foreign pro or a pretty serious Indian gamer, those intent on competing. It's unclear how many people showed up on the first day. Some people say hundreds of school kids were given a free day one pass to make it look more full, but let's call it 1,000. By day two, the crowd had thinned to about 300. And for the first time ever, the promises for the event were dramatically scaled back. Firstly, on the morning of day two, WTF announced that all the after parties and concerts were canceled. They added, without warning, that 7 games, including StarCraft 2 and Battlefield 3, two of the biggest esports at the time, were cut altogether from the tournament. So a bunch of foreign pros and some pretty competitive Indian gamers, having traveled all this way, were shit out of luck. Admirably, though, some of the local gamers organized a joint StarCraft 2 and Battlefield 3 tournament for no prize money at a nearby apartment and invited the foreign players. They apparently managed to get a functional LAN and bracket done on their own, making them more competent than 20 or so WTF admins, as events would demonstrate.
What is foreshadowing?
Back at IGC, there was still more incompetence and grifting. For one thing, WTF stepped up the fees, realizing they needed to squeeze every rupee out of anyone left. They had a pay-to-enter Fruit Ninja tournament on these busted-ass knockoff iPads that made the game unplayable because the touchscreens and FPS were so bad, only for the winner to find out their prize was one of these pieces of shit.
Thank you, bitch.
They got food and water in the venue too, but, surprise, surprise, it costs an absurd amount. WTF also stated that all PC games would be starting later in the day, which ended up being in the afternoon, so more waiting. And of the 160 PCs set up, only 40 of them were able to run games effectively. These then needed to be divided between 4 or 5 major games, most of which were 5v5 games, with 15 to 20 teams per game. COD 4, for example, had to run a bracket of 16 teams on 10 computers, 1 match at a time, for 30 matches. A painfully slow process made worse by the fact that the WTF admin had no experience managing a bracket. Then, at 6 p.m., in the middle of matches that had taken quite a while to get going, the generator for the building was shut off for 15 minutes, plunging everything into darkness and forcing all matches to be restarted. If only I could have heard that gamer rage. Eventually, Orange Esports, one of the big teams, started adminning some of the games instead of the useless WTF admins. They somehow managed to run the brackets more efficiently. Still, it was a slog, with COD 4's first 9 matches wrapping up by 1:30 a.m. Apparently, Counter-Strike, being managed by a WTF admin running a double elimination bracket no one could keep track of, moved so slowly that Moscow 5 never got to play a single match that day. Beyond this mismanagement, though, stuff started getting sketchy. For one thing, if on day 1 nothing happened, on day 2, the stuff that happened got a lot of foreign teams pretty nervous about the existence of the prize money. See, it was hard to entirely doubt the tournament on day 1 because, as yet, there was no tournament, still just the promise of one. But on day 2, teams started to see IGC for what it was, a massively under-resourced enterprise that clearly did not have the funds to properly function. If you're a pro sitting through day 2, you see vendors are walking out, employees aren't showing up, even various rentals like TVs and PCs are randomly being repossessed. They certainly didn't look like people who had $300K sitting in the bank. Equally troubling was WTF's treatment of the local media and gaming community that had been critical of them. The Games Ministry, whose coverage of the event had been straightforwardly honest, reported being threatened by Kushagra's thugs to leave, and eventually to write something nice about the event. This is the first mention of local thugs, who Kushagra hired as muscle to intimidate people, but it wouldn't be the last. Day 3, payday, hopefully. Things were quite behind, so WTF announced that the event would be running late into the night of day 3 and into the next morning to make up for lost time. And finally, M5 played their first Counter-Strike match and won easily. They were understandably pissed as the clear favorites, since the only real uncertainty was whether they would win the tournament in time to catch their 4 a.m. return flight that night. As the hours went by, it became clear they wouldn't. So the team's manager took to Facebook to announce that, so as to guarantee they had enough time to play through to the finals, he rebooked their flights at the cost of $2,900. At the time, some people said this was a smart move, while others, like Vijay Nainal, called it an expensive way to learn the meaning of check bouncing. In hindsight, the teams were suffering from a severe bout of hopium mixed with sunk cost fallacy. They knew this would be an utter waste of money and time unless they placed highly in the tournament, where maybe there was still a shot they'd get paid. Anyway, immediately after M5's win, the Games Ministry was surrounded by thugs and told by Kushagra to leave. This time, fearing what would happen if they didn't, they exited. The day dragged on. The console games actually went pretty smoothly. Tekken, Street Fighter, and FIFA wrapped up more or less on time and were live streamed to sizable audiences. With the winners anointed, it became clear that the prize money wasn't going to be paid out there and then. Rather, winners would be given big plastic checks to hold up for the cameras, but the real payout would come later. This on its own was not out of the ordinary, but it prompted the reps from M5, Myth, and Orange Esports to jointly go to Kushagra around 8 p.m. to inquire about the prize money. Kushagra assured them that the bank that had guaranteed the funds simply had to fill out some paperwork, get some bank details, and would wire them the prize money in 4 to 6 weeks. It sounded like the team swallowed this explanation because, well, what else could they do? The Dota finals between Myth and Orange Esports wrapped up by 10 p.m., with Orange taking home the big prize. In contrast, COD 4 was hopelessly behind, and Counter-Strike, even with M5 tearing through the bracket, seemed like it would never finish in time. So M5 was stuck at the venue. As it turned out, the COD 4 Grand Finals wouldn't start until 4 a.m.
It's 4 in the fucking morning!
Counter-Strike was even further behind. However, at 4:30 a.m., just as the finals were getting underway, the power from the generator was abruptly cut off, and the organizers, without warning, said the event was over. In fact, it seemed like IGC couldn't have continued even if they wanted it to. The scene that follows sounds like the foreclosure of the world's most indebted, most bankrupt company. As the lights were shut off, the last bewildered gamers, including M5, looked on as WTF organizers hastily grabbed their stuff and started ordering everyone to leave. Simultaneously, the venue owners materialized and ordered WTF staff to leave.
Get the fuck out of here.
As vendors frantically piled computers, monitors, and furniture that gamers were just using into trucks. It was a massive eviction repossession. So what happened to M5? The finals were canceled. That was obvious. Nightmare scenario for them. Well, firstly, I'll say that this is where events get murky, and accounts come from basically one or two unreliable sources. M5's Counter-Strike manager, Alexander, this big fucking guy, and namely M5's organizational manager, Dima, who was not there at the time but later wrote up the account given to the press. So be warned. They narrate that as the whole event was abruptly shut down, Kshagra told Alexander that he'd meet up later that afternoon at their hotel to talk prize money, assuring him that he'd reimburse M5's travel expenses and give them a big chunk of the expected prize money. Kshagra then handed him a business card with his contact info. Moscow 5's team waited in a taxi outside the venue as this was going on, during which they were menaced by these big security thugs. Alexander then met up with the team and they left for the hotel, and, according to Dima, were followed by the hired thugs. When they arrived at their hotel at 7 a.m., the M5 players were exhausted and crashed, while Alexander stayed up trying to reach out to figure out how to get the prize money. Time passed, and it became clear that Kshagra was not eager to get in contact. He didn't come to the hotel, and when Alexander called him, he heard this. Kshagra had disconnected the contact number he had given him. At this point, Alexander recorded the short video you just saw, recounting the events of the past few hours, saying he couldn't contact Kshagra, and uploaded it. Then went to sleep. What follows is according to Dima's account of events, which is very strange. He claimed that the disaster that was the final hours of IGC was recorded on video by Alexander. Dima said that when talking to Kshagra, Alexander insinuated he had this damaging footage and used it as leverage to get the prize money. Dima claimed that after Alexander uploaded the video where he called Kshagra, he went to sleep in his hotel room. Dima alleged that when Alexander woke up hours later, he realized the bag with the money and the memory card with that footage had been searched through and the memory card and cash taken. And suffice it to say, this sounds impossible. For one thing, they were staying in a 5-star Hilton hotel with very tight security. The idea that someone could break in unheard and unnoticed and would then steal the exact item containing this footage would imply that Alexander is basically deaf and that hotel staff was in cahoots with Kshagra. Not likely. And at the time, many people who were sympathetic to Moscow 5 still dismissed this part of the story as ludicrous. But multiple media outlets published Moscow 5 robbed as the main headline of IGC, despite it making little sense. I don't know why Dima would overlay the story of this shadowy burglary on top of the already damaging account of IGC, but it could have been a ploy to pressure Kshagra into paying them so they'd stop the accusations. In any case, Dima was soon indicted and extradited to the US for his unrelated role in the largest credit card fraud and hacking ring ever. I'm not joking. So he's hardly a reliable source. That's another story. But I want to be clear. The evidence indicates that this robbery didn't happen, or at least not as described. However, another robbery did occur that day. This story was largely overlooked because the person robbed was not a foreign pro gamer. In fact, he wasn't an attendee. he was one of the organizers, Max Axe. Basically, on that final day, as everyone gamed late into the night, Max Axe was still lead admin, running the tournament. Around midnight, though, he disappeared for a time, during which he claimed he was beaten badly by multiple people whom he later refused to identify. They also robbed him of his money and jewelry. There are also accounts of him returning a little while later to the venue where he was expected to continue adminning the tournament, but having been hit pretty hard in the head, sounds like he was saying stuff like,
"Help me, help. I fell down."
So around 1:30 a.m., he was taken to the hospital where he was treated for significant head trauma. He posted pictures from the hospital where he looked pretty beat up, but it sounds like he was eventually okay. I won't be showing those pictures here for YouTube reasons and ethical reasons. As to who did this and why, I can only speculate, but it seems unlikely to me that it was the gamers. For one thing, not many were left at the event by then, and those who were vying for the gold medal, not trying to curb stomp the organizers. For another thing, if you were a group of gamers angry with Max Axe, you probably would have been most pissed and likely to beat him up on day one, the day when it became clear that IGC was a ripoff. By the end of the third day, what would be the point? And thirdly, midnight on the third and final day of IGC would coincide with the time that many vendors would have expected to be done with the event and get paid. And if you were, say, sketchy hired muscle, think thugs, hearing a lot of promises about when you'll get your money, maybe this would have been the moment you'd had enough. This, again, is my speculation, but it's a theory echoed by VJ Ninel, who was pretty spot on the entire time, and who said, Max Axe should have known what would happen if you try scams with thugs and scammers. By the way, even others like the game ministry were threatened by his thugs. As the scam turned bad, I don't think they would have been too happy with him either. So that was more or less it for the event. There was quite an aftermath, especially for the Indian gaming scene, but aside from these robbery incidents, the event kind of ended with a whimper. And ultimately, while there was a lot of backbiting, blame shifting, distancing, and justifying to come from the WTF team, it seems like their main approach to IGC, forever after, was already in place by the end of the event. They would make a hasty exit and disappear. So this video is already a good deal longer than I thought, and to go through all the aftermath of this event in detail would probably take another 20 minutes. If there is enough interest, please let me know, and I will do my best to put together a follow-up video. But for now, I'll just list the major events, or lack of events, following the tournament. Did anyone get paid the prize money? No. What was that bank guarantee? Well, Moscow 5 leaked a document that they said Kushagra had sent to them that looks like a bank guarantee. That document turned out to be a forgery. Kushagra then claimed, no, that wasn't the form we showed you a different, real bank guarantee form. But also, we're not paying you. So, were there any legal consequences for the scammers? Not that I can see. Were there consequences for the Indian esports scene? Yes, and they were bad. It's hard to measure just how bad, but IGC really set back the scene in a major way. But many would say that in the grand scheme of frauds, IGC had a pretty small footprint. After all, the internet, and YouTube especially, is littered with tales of the frauds that no one saw coming, and the events of the decade that collapsed in debacle. To these more well-known tales, IGC is both mirror image and antithesis. While it has all the hallmarks of a fire festival, it never rose to such a scale, in part because it was never truly convincing. IGC was an emperor has no clothes scenario, A scam without a clever disguise, without a charismatic spokesman, without a large audience of gullible marks, without a tidal wave of hype, and without, from what I can see, a profit. And this last point is important. IGC almost certainly lost money for its organizers. Even though it seems they were never planning to pay the prize money or honor the debts to vendors, they learned the hard way that trying to run an esports event absent sponsors is akin to building a massive cash fire. While esports is big business, these events are made possible by the fact that they are, in the eyes of sponsors, advertising opportunities. Remove the sponsors handing out cash, and any event, real or fake, just isn't going to work. Add to that refunds controlled by a third-party ticketing service, and you might as well cancel the whole thing. And in such a scenario, the world's most self-deluded, least convincing scam, one has to wonder, who is the victim? The first and obvious answer is the handful of people who, due to the distances of location and language, actually fell for this thing, namely the foreign teams. These people lost tens of thousands of dollars, and it's wrong to say that they weren't totally burned by the whole affair or that they deserved it. They were burned a lot and undeservedly. But what about all the people who never fell for it, who indeed tried to spread the word that this thing was a lie and a cheat, to warn the world, and who all the same suffered the consequences? And it's hard to emphasize this enough, for India's esports scene, this event was a cataclysm. Let's not forget, this scam failed to make money in large part because major sponsors looked at it and said, "We're not sure about investing in India." IGC reinforced that instinct and validated the lesson. Don't do esports in India. For a country with a small, grassroots esports scene that was slowly climbing its way into global gaming relevance, this crude, obvious scam was a fucking gut punch. The setback of setbacks. The confirmation of every fear, prejudice, and stereotype the world had about their country and what would happen if you went there. Even worse, the gamers of India had to watch this train wreck happen in slow motion, while helplessly yelling for everyone to look out. In the end, of course, IGC didn't kill esports in India. You can't just ignore a country with like 20% of the world's population, but it hurt them for a long time. While a lot about IGC remains a mystery, that consequence, the maiming of the Indian esports scene, was apparent right away, and it was felt right away. Sponsors were spooked, events were canceled, and the whole thing, over and done with in 3 days, clung to the scene like a rotten smell for years. Scams don't just hurt those who fall for them. They undermine faith, tarnish reputations, confirm prejudices, sow resentment, smear innocent people, entire countries, in some cases. And IGC proves that the scam that accomplishes nothing else can still manage that.